This is the Unstarving Musicians Podcast. I'm your host, Robonzo. This podcast features conversations with me and indie music artists. Conversations intended to help other indie musicians be better at marketing, business, the creative process, and all the other things that empower us to do more of what we love. Make music. Hey there, loyal listeners. Would you like to help other independent musicians find this podcast? Subscribe on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast service. It really helps. Would you like to support the podcast? Join the Unstarving Musician community. Just go to unstarvingmusician.com and join right there on the homepage. If you're an independent musician, you'll be glad you joined because I share tips and lessons you can use in your music journey. And this isn't just coming from me and my years of experience as a gigging musician. It also comes from the hundreds of other musicians and songwriters I've talked to as part of the Unstarving Musician Project, including those I've interviewed for this podcast. And it's all free, just for being part of the community. Another way to support the podcast is to pick up a copy of the Unstarving Musician's Guide to Getting Paid Gigs, how to get booked and paid what you're worth over and over again. You can get your very own paperback or Kindle version on Amazon, and you can find it just about anywhere fine ebooks are sold. Have you heard of Bandzoogle? They've come up on this podcast several times. Many of my guests use it to power their artist website. You may have heard me say in recent episodes that I was contemplating the launch of a subscription-based service of my own. Well, you know what? These guys have it figured out already. I know because I've had the grand tour. I recently signed up for an account too. You'll see my artist website powered by Bandzoogle soon. I just have to untangle it from unstarvingmusician.com. It's complicated, trust me. Bandzoogle's not complicated. From garage bands to Grammy winners, Bandzoogle powers websites for thousands of musicians around the world. Their simple step-by-step system will get you online fast. Dozens of mobile-friendly templates will help you customize your design and content. It's built for musicians by musicians. Bandzoogle has all the features you need for your website and your EPK already built in, including a merch and download store to sell music and merch commission-free right on your website. You can use the tour calendar to promote your shows and sell tickets commission-free, mailing list tools to grow your fan list and send professional newsletters, integrations to pull in content from all of your online services, including Twitter, Instagram, and SoundCloud, and live support from their musician-friendly team 7 days a week. Plans start at just $8.29 a month, which includes hosting and your own free custom domain name. Go to bandzoogle.com to start your 30-day free trial, and be sure to use the promo code Robonzo to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. That's bandzoogle.com, promo code Robonzo to build your website today. My guest for this episode, Mark Addison, came on my radar in a somewhat roundabout way. His Tips Concerts series has been mentioned many times on this podcast. He's an Austin-based multi-instrumentalist, songwriter, and producer. His property hosts the iconic little trailer that is the stage of Tips Concerts, and it's host to his very, very nice airy studios. We talk about Wendy Colonna, his co-conspirator in the Tips Concerts series, his love of DIY recording, how he goes about selecting his work, his collaboration recording project with Jana Pochop, featured in episode 89, Tips Concerts, of course, and a whole lot more. Here is me and Mark Addison. I was very interested in speaking with you, or I had growing interest in speaking with you, Mark, because of Tips Concerts, and then I recently, as you know, had Wendy Colonna on the podcast, and we were talking about, actually, before we even started recording, I'm not sure if it made it in the actual recording episode, but I said, is Mark Addison your partner? Because I couldn't figure out the relationship, and she was very casually, kind of giggled and said no, but she was married to someone else. Anyway, it came about that you and she were very involved together in Tips Concerts. So it was just fortuitous. I think I had started emailing you, and not until I spoke with Wendy and she pinged you that we managed to connect. So I'm really happy to have you here. I was telling Wendy, by the way, maybe we can start with Tips Concerts if you don't mind. That
sure.
Tips Concerts has been mentioned many, many times on this podcast, and I was telling her, Tips Concerts is like a celebrity thing on here for me, and some others. She seemed a little surprised, but she thought it was very cool. She didn't know. So the reason it is because the topic of house concerts came on the radar of the podcast fairly early, and it just became a growing interest of mine. And I think as soon as the words were uttered, Tips Concerts were all house concerts. Tips Concerts were brought up. So can you tell me and the listeners a little bit about the history, why, how, where, and you and Wendy?
Well, Wendy and I have worked on a number of projects. I think I worked on some records. I worked on her album Nectar, and then she was getting ready to write her next album. And she, Wendy had been living on the road for a long time. Mm-hmm. She didn't really have an address. She, you could sort of find her here, find her there. And she said, listen, I want to sit down and put some roots down to write this record. Would you mind if I got a trailer and put it on your property? And so, where I live, and where the studio is on a hill, in South, sort of outside of Southeast Austin. It's out in kind of in cow country, but we have a big, a nice view of downtown, and I have some acreage. So I said, well, sure, you could put a trailer on my property. And then the next morning, she called up and said, we'll be right over. We have our trailer. And so we figured out where to put the trailer, and she decided pretty early on that she was going to need to build a roof over it, just because they're not really meant for the Texas heat and stuff. So they built a roof, and they built a lovely porch, and I took one look at that porch, and I said, that's a stage. And she said, yes, that's a stage, isn't it? And she named her trailer Tip because she purchased it she had put aside all her tip money from all the shows she'd done over the past, I don't know how many years.
Oh, wow.
And that was the money that went to buy the trailer. And she said, what should we call it? I said, well, how'd you pay for it? So we called it Tip, and that became the Tips Concert Series. And it's very rural kind of potluck. There's a stage and a PA, and then, there's the house and the studio kind of across the lawn from it. And so it's a real friendly and sort of low-key thing. And we've managed to have some really, really great shows over the past couple of years.
That's cool. In ways, it sounds very classic house concert, the whole potluck thing and the vibe that it has been described to me. I did not know the story about the name of the trailer and all that, which is very fun.
Yeah, it's a little different than most house concert scenarios, because most house concert scenarios are fan driven. So they're driven by somebody who's a real aficionado of this kind of music or that kind of music and wants to open their home and hip other people to it. Whereas this series is basically a working musician and a working producer saying, with lots of musical friends saying, hey, let's have some parties.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's a neat. And I'm sure goes without saying for anyone who knows you especially, but because of your background and the whole studio thing and production, that it must have a unique vibe with that as well. Does Wendy get to play them very often? I know she's kind of a working musician, probably not always around to do them, but does she get to do them at least like once a year?
She does about once a year, yeah.
That's good. That's really good. And then the studio. So what has become of the trailer? She doesn't live there now, right?
Wendy married the guy who built the porch, who built the stage. God bless them both. I mean, he came and helped, and they fell in love and got married, and so the trailer became basically just Tips Concerts. It's no longer occupied. It's just the green room for the concert series.
Oh, very nice. Yeah, and I was kind of thinking was, well, the studio's probably not in there, but I'm just going to ask what goes on in there now.
Well, the studio is like a it's kind of a very high-end home studio. I mean, the control room is a room in my house, and then there's an outbuilding that's got that's the cutting room. They're all sort of within 100 yards or so of each other. Yeah.
I meant to ask you this before we, officially started talking here for the recording, but can you pronounce the name of the studio for me?
Airy.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been kicking myself saying, that probably wasn't the smartest name. Airy, because I live on a hill and because I have such a view of, a 360-degree view. In a lot of birds, I thought airy, which is, the nest of a bird, high in a tree or high on a cliff. But it's one of those words that is easier to... it's not easy to convey. Anyway.
Well, I thought that was it. It's the spelling is unusual to the average reader. And so I just wanted to make sure I had it right. It looks like a lovely studio. And so for any of you who would like to enjoy these cool pics that are available at the studio, there are, among other places, I think, on Facebook at Airy Studio, and it's AERIE Studio. And
that is it.
Mark has some cool pics there, and I believe you can beat me to it if you want. I'm sitting here kind of going back to look, but I believe the studio has its own website as well. Sure does. Airy Studio.
Yeah.
AirieStudio.com. Yeah, that's funny because I had it up in another tab here. It's and it features a beautiful photograph of the trailer that we're talking about. So you definitely want to see that. Looks like one of your friends, Dave Pedley or Peedley.
Dave Pedley, he's a magnificent, he's a wonderful photographer, and he's been very, very active in the Austin music scene. And
we took a nice pic for it.
He graciously let me use that on my website.
It's cool. I like it. I gathered from looking over Facebook and your bio that you didn't start life in Austin, and I thought maybe you did in Cleveland, Ohio, and then I read you were actually born in London, England. Did you have formative years that you spent there before coming to the States?
I don't remember a lot of it. My father was a conductor, an operatic conductor, and he was on tour a lot when I was young, and I came over to the States when I was, I guess I was just about 6 years old. So we landed in New York, and he was working in the city, and then he became he started the opera department in Cleveland at the Cleveland City Music. And so I was raised, most of my teens and stuff, I was in Cleveland.
And how long has Austin been home? Did I read the 90s at some point you made your way there?
I think I finally moved here in 96, but I had been, I had a band called The Borrowers that was signed to an EMI label called Guardian. And we came to Austin quite a lot. I think we played South by Southwest in 93. I think we played every year, about 10 years in a row after that. And so I had started to meet some people, and I got a publishing deal actually at that South by Southwest show. And one of the first things my publisher did, and I was living in LA at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I should say I had moved to LA in late 80s and started the band. And my publisher said, we're gonna put you together with this guy named Will Sexton to write. So Will and I wrote in my little writer's room on La Cienega in LA at Rondor Publishing. And Will was just, he was such a wonderful guy. And he called me up, I think the next year when we were getting ready to come out for South by, and he said, you should come a week early. Because I got lots of gigs for you. And so we came early, and Will had booked a bunch of gigs for his band, and he shoehorned us in on all of them. So he would go up and play 3 songs and then say, hey, I want you guys to meet my friends, the Borrowers. And then he'd go sit in the back of the bar and we'd play.
That's nice.
But I was struck, I was struck by the friendliness of the people here, and the city was awesome. This was in about 5, I guess. Yeah, I grew up in Cleveland, and my take on it was when I grew up in Cleveland was that if you didn't want to let people know that you were different, because people who were different weren't weren't liked. And then I moved to LA, and everybody was trying to be as different as they could. So if you weren't different, you weren't liked. But in Austin, the word didn't even exist. You walk down the street and say hi to whoever came down the sidewalk, and have a conversation with whoever came down the sidewalk. And you never met them, but it was just really friendly. And I thought to myself, this is where I should be, because the people are amazing.
Yeah. That's funny. I've never thought about that fact of Austin, that like the word doesn't exist. And in meeting people and growing up in Texas, meeting people, you'll meet people just like you might in Dallas Fort Worth, but then you'll meet people that are clearly very Austin, but it's just part of the scene. Different doesn't really exist. It
doesn't. I mean, it didn't at that time. Mm-hmm. I mean, Austin's changing a lot and it's growing a lot. But, to illustrate, I went back after I'd been here a couple of months. I was called back to LA to produce a record for Maya Sharp. And I was staying at their compound up in Van Nuys. And I would borrow a car and go to the Starbucks in the morning. And I was used to being in Austin, where you just said hi to everybody. And I would go to that Starbucks in Van Nuys, and people would walk into the wall, just trying to avert my eyes.
Mm-hmm.
It's like there was no eye contact with anybody. You couldn't talk to anybody. And that really kind of cemented it for me. It was like, yep, now I see the difference. So,
it's funny because when we moved, my wife and I, from Texas to San Jose, I was telling you we spent 17 years there, San Jose, California, yeah. and I experienced the same. I was like, oh wow, people don't just say hi here, and it's weird. And there were times where I would just make a game of it to see who would make eye contact. But the other thing that changed, is the whole handheld device thing, and that just gave people more of an excuse not to have human contact. So probably goes on everywhere now.
But that's true. Although this, I think, happened in maybe 97. It was really before.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean, because even in 99, there were no iPhones, and that's when we were in California, and it's kind of funny.
Yeah.
I know what you mean. Austin's a beautiful place, and Texas has a lot of wonderful people. So when did, during the 90s, if we just kind of go back to that, you're playing with the Borrowers, and you mentioned that you were doing some production. When did recording and producing or engineering, however they sort of came about, when did they come into the picture of your music life?
Well, I was playing in lots of bands in Cleveland, and had actually quite a career in Cleveland for a while up through the 80s. And I think I produced my first record in like 78 or 80 in Cleveland.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I was always around the studio. When I was in high school, I was so lucky because my best friend's father owned one of the two premier recording studios in Cleveland, and so we would head downtown at 8:00 at night with the keys to the studio and work until 7 a.m, and then clean up, lock up, and go home. And so I was so lucky to have a large amount of studio experience when I was in my teens.
Wow.
So it was pretty natural. I sort of became the go-to guy in Cleveland for a while because, I just had the experience.
Sure.
And I also play a lot of instruments and stuff like that. So
what's your primary instrument, by the way, in your own mind?
Yeah. I prefer to play bass. I love playing guitar, and I was raised playing piano. I started taking piano when I was 6, so I've been running from playing piano ever since then.
That's great. Well, you've been doing it a long time, the recording aspect of what you do. If you could give artists, songwriters, bands an idea of how you work with artists these days? Maybe so that if we have some people listening that, and surely we do that, or will, when this comes out, that have done things super, DIY or in a home studio. How are you working with artists these days, and what types of artists do you work with?
I love recording bands. I love recording, setting up 5 guys in the studio and getting everything mic'd up and hitting record and going nuts. I love that. But I do but having said that, I do a lot of work with solo artists, where we sort of start from the song itself and maybe the instrument that carries most of the rhythm and the melody for the song and the vocal, and then depending on who it is, we add to it. It's really different. It's really all different. Every artist is different. Every artist has a different way of working in the studio. Every artist has their own comfort zone. Some people sing better at night. Some people sing better in the morning. Some people work better in the afternoon. Some people like to work quickly. Some people like to think things, to think everything through before they hit record. But I'm a huge fan of DIY recording. I think it's really about the music, and I think there's probably too much emphasis, or I should say there can be too much emphasis on sort of using really high-end gear and getting into a really expensive studio and stuff like that, when it's really the vocal, the delivery, and the melody and the beats that are important. And, whether the guitar is done through a SM58 onto your iPhone, or whether it's done with 6 mics, through a $4,000 preamp, I don't think it's really going to matter in the end. It's what the guitar is doing, it's what the vocalist is doing that really counts. I've done quite a bit of work over the years with people who did a lot of the stuff themselves and then brought it into the studio to kind of polish it. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's a fantastic way to work, because when you're in the studio, even if there's not a clock, the clock's running. You're paying for it. And when you're doing it on your own time in your own place, you have the freedom to experiment and to do all kinds of things that you can't really do in the studio unless you have a huge budget. Yeah, I think that recording on your own is a great idea, and I've had some great results bringing tracks into the studio that people had done, in GarageBand. Yeah. Because it gives them the chance to really put the time in. Yeah. How do you go about selecting work or the people that you work with these days? I try to keep an eye on all of the thousands of musicians that are in Austin. I do go out and listen to people at open mics and things like that, because you can run into some really great people there. Yeah. I don't have a whole lot of rules, and I like working with stuff that I sort of don't understand as well, as much as I like working with stuff that I do understand, because I learn more when I'm working with people who are playing something new to me. So I don't know. I guess my experience has been that I always end up enjoying making a record, even if at the beginning I might have thought to myself, wow, I don't know I don't know if I grasp what this person's doing enough. Because it becomes a collaboration where I am taught as much as I am, pushing the thing forward.
Sure. I think I've heard this about you, or the word, collaboration with a couple of people that you've worked with. And tell me if I'm remembering this right too, because it speaks to the open mic thing that you do to just, I guess, ferret out people that are interesting. But did you meet Jana am I saying it right? Is it Pochop?
Jana Pochop.
Yeah.
Jana. So Jana's an amazing songwriter, and I'd known Jana for some years because she does all kinds of things in the music business. She does all kinds of support services for other artists, and she came and played at Tip's concert.
Ah, okay.
And it was the first time I'd heard her play. And she played with Susan Gibson, and I can't remember who else. And she played this folk rap that I was just enthralled with. And I said, we got to record this. And so we actually ended up creating sort of a studio duo called 1, 2, 3 Scream.
Mm-hmm.
And we did six songs and released it as an EP. And it was a weird mishmash of me throwing all kinds of 80s synths and loops and stuff, and she onto these sort of really cool pure folk songs, pure singer-songwriter songs, I should say. But Jana's a really interesting person because, she's a folk singer, she's a girl with a guitar, and yet she, her influences are like Eminem, Taylor Swift. I mean, her influences are so broad. She really doesn't fit into any mold.
You are listening to my conversation with Mark Addison, and you are about to listen to a clip from a track called Mercy Bound, which is a song that was recorded by Mark's band, The Borrowers, in the late 90s. It was covered by Joan Baez on her record Gone from Danger and was the title track of Edwin McCain's recent new album. Check it out.
Late last night I woke in a dream to the sound of a voice that was almost a scream. Ooh. From out of the city and out of the street, out where the wind hits the cold concrete. Ooh.
I heard Wendy Colonna talk about you in a very collaborative way. I guess probably for reasons revolving around music, recording, as well as with Tip's concerts.
Yeah, well, I am first a songwriter, and I do get to write a lot with people I work with, and so Wendy and I collaborated on quite a few songs on her last record. But yeah, I got a lot of different ways I approach this, and because I am first a songwriter and not, a guy who went to engineering school, I probably do have a more collaborative way of approaching making a record than some folks might.
That makes sense, given your background. I wanted to jump back to something that had came into my mind and swiftly drifted away, and it just came back again. But and this comes because I recently spoke with a gentleman who's based in Florida, and his background is in composition and musical. He's been a musical director for, I think it was called Nuba, a Cirque du Soleil production.
Oh yeah,
yeah. And he and his wife had. They created essentially what was a house concert, but they very quickly, and I don't know if it was from day one, but they very quickly decided that I know what it was. They couldn't find good live music on the one day off they had during the week, which was Tuesday. So they started this music series, kind of like a house concert. And then he realized that the community at large where he was sort of lacking art and music and art for the public as much as he and his wife were accustomed to. So they kept it going, and it starts evolving. They outgrow their house. They sell the farm to get another house and develop basically a sound stage where they're hosting visual and music arts on a regular basis and giving the entire community access to this. And they have different types of events. So some of them are free, some of them are like super low cost, and then they have these higher end events. But it's always people who like. He told me that he'll get calls sometimes from people who are well-known artists, and those aren't really the people he's after. He's kind of after, maybe the Japanese, unusual eclectic artist who happens to be passing through that no one around at where he lives is ever going to see if he doesn't host them. So he'll do things like that. So my question, why I go on this long story about him, is that he and his wife were really driven to bring music and art to the community and make it accessible. And I just wanted to ask you with tips. It is unusual. Like I said it when we first started talking about it, that it definitely has this traditional house concert vibe, but it's clearly something a little different, as you pointed out. And I knew this just from what I've learned about it. It's a regular thing, weather permitting, seasonal in Austin. And it seems to be doing like almost a public service to the arts. And I was just curious to know if some of your motivation, either from the get-go or as time has gone on, has been a lot about community and making music available to people and making a great place for artists to come play where they might not otherwise get the opportunities.
Well, I certainly think that having a place for artists to come and play where they might not get other opportunities is part of it. I would love to think that in the future, down the road, we could expand it enough that I felt that we were, really getting back to the community. At this point, we're hopefully providing people who are already music fans with a venue to see maybe somebody that they do know, and then maybe two people that they don't know on the same stage. And I think that putting those kinds of shows together is very important, because the sort of people that come to the tip shows are very receptive to new music. And of course, we're in Austin, where being receptive to music is sort of, you learn at about the age of 4. So yeah, I mean, I certainly feel that the people that our audiences appreciate what we're doing. I would love to think that at some point in the future we could get onto that grand scale of the Gentleman in Florida. It's a little bit different in Austin because we have many, many venues and many, many musicians. And we have a lot of, there's a lot of competition, and people here need to make a living. We haven't been able yet to feature someone on our stage by themselves that nobody's ever heard of, because without putting together a bill that includes someone they have heard of, we're not going to get any people, because it's the audience.
Sure.
And I should say, we're out in the country. We're not smack in the middle of downtown Austin where we have foot traffic. We're a little tiny piece of a huge music machine in a huge music town.
Yeah.
And there are, there must be 30 or 40 house concert venues, within 10 or 15 miles of Austin.
Yeah, certainly
And they're all different.
Yeah, certainly for anyone who we might have gotten the wheels in their head turning, I'm sure that every community is very unique. In you're speaking to the likely differences between Austin and I believe it was Orlando, where Benoit Glazer and his wife reside and created this big foundation around the music and arts. But yeah definitely unique. Unique
in Austin on any given night, there's about 40 or 50 or maybe 60 or maybe 100 different people that you can go see play music.
True.
I mean, there is.
Yeah.
When you put together a coffee shop, coffee houses, venues, patio bars, house concerts, clubs, music clubs, there's a lot of stuff. If I decide that I want to go see music, it takes me a long time to sort of sort through who's playing. So
yeah, and
it is.
Am I correct in assuming that Tip's Concerts in a way has taken on a life of its own?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We get. Well, we're sort of hoping it continues to take on a life of its own. Yeah, I mean, it's yeah, I don't know how to answer that really.
No, I would imagine, I was asking thinking that it's probably, it's taken on a life of its own such that it's almost like an obligation. Well, I don't mean obligation in like something that you're slogging through, but like a community obligation that people come to expect that you have to fulfill, because it has become a very nice thing for both the performers and the listener community.
I hope that's true. I mean, we're getting ready to embark on our schedule for this year. So
cool.
We'll see how it goes.
And for anyone who might be a producer, songwriter with any similarities to your background, they make music, have made music, they have the luxury of some sort of space to do anything remotely like Tip's Concerts, simply from the perspective of, hosting local talent. Maybe they're in the right place, or, maybe they're in a place where they can do it occasionally. Is there compelling reason to do it that, obviously the community give back aspect is kind of just there if you're doing it well. Are there reasons that they might want to do it that are to help with, either sustain or nurture their artistic endeavors in production and songwriting? And in other words, are there advantages to a host like that has kind of a background like you do to doing something like creating something like, or trying to create something like Tips?
Well, I think anything that puts a bunch of musicians together and music gets made is going to be great for everyone involved. I think that there are very compelling reasons to do house concerts, to host house concerts. When I was touring in the 90s, every show we did was a club. Mm-hmm. And all the musicians in Austin, they would go on these tours where you go, this club, this club, this club. And then I remember John D. Graham, who notoriously toured clubs. I remember sitting down with him, and he started to expound about this house concert. And he changed his whole touring regimen so that when we're touring, we have what we call anchor dates. So anchor dates is like, we know there's going to be a crowd here. This is going to be good money. This will pay for gas for the next couple of days. And it used to be the anchor date would be like a good club somewhere. But now, for almost everybody that I work with, the anchor dates are house concerts.
Right.
Because house concerts they're the place that artists can directly interface with their audience. They can directly communicate with their audience without there being a middleman. And the music industry is such now that we are back to that that communication between the artist and the audience without a middleman. For many years during the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, the artists were far apart from their audiences, and there was a record label, and there was a management, there was a booking agent, there was all this stuff in between. And then the record labels all fell apart, and Bonham fell out of the industry, and technology changed. And we're right back into like being minstrels, where musicians interact directly with their patrons and their audiences, and that's the way you do it. You host a house concert, and it means that these people who host house concerts have these great personal relationships with their favorite musicians, and it means the musicians know that they can go to this place and they'll be taken care of, and they'll have a place to sleep, and there'll be people there. So yeah, I think it's extremely important that people do house concerts. I think that the livelihoods of probably a lot of the touring musicians that we love, that you love, are dependent on that.
Yeah. If you had any words of wisdom for a music artist or a music fan, I guess let's talk about the music art from the music artist perspective, who has aspirations to host them, beyond just getting started. Anything you would share, thoughts, things to think about that would help make the the initial effort a little better?
Well, I think, yes, I do. I think, I grew up in Cleveland. I was playing in a band. We were a very popular band. Everybody thought we were going to get a record deal. I had no idea, and continue to have no idea how the music industry worked for years after that, because it was all about, you're going to get this great manager, you're going to get this great record label. It is vitally important that if you're going to be a professional musician, that you know what a publicist does, that you can be a publicist, that you know what a manager does, that you can be a manager, that you know what a record label does, that you can be a record label. You have to understand how touring works. You have to understand the music economy. You have to understand copyright. You have to understand performing rights organizations. You have to understand how all of the income streams work. You have to be your own business manager. And the people that are successful independent musicians know all that stuff. They understand exactly how everything works. And it's an education that you need to have. You can't get by, well, I'm sure there's exceptions, but I would say with exception, you can't get by just being a really great singer-songwriter or a really great guitar player or a really great this. You have to understand how you fit into the entire industry, and you have to know how every piece of it works. That's my diatribe for today.
It's a good one. No, it's a good one for everyone to think about, and I would imagine.
And I also, I'm sorry to interrupt. I also tell musicians, young musicians, I say, learn as many skills as you can. Learn to play the bass, learn to play the keyboard, learn to play as many instruments as you can, because you're going to get in a studio and you're going to have a bass player and he's not going to be doing what you want, and you need to have the words to be able to tell him to do what you want. So you need to have an understanding of all of the musical pieces of what's going on, as well as the business pieces.
Oh, that's great. That's great advice. Cool. And so what musically challenges you these days, be it either from it's something that you're working to overcome at this point in your career, or just challenging from the perspective of it's super inspiring, something that's just really, you're motivated to learn more about? What's of interest or challenge for you right now?
Well, I can't give you names. There's a couple of people that I'm really interested in right now and working with. And in general, I get really interested because I see people that are really doing it. I mean, using GarageBand, doing their own overdub, putting their pieces of music together, and really exploring. And I find that very exciting when people do a bunch of stuff on their own. There's so much great music out there, and there's so many people. The world has changed. You can make a record in your bedroom, and there's so many people doing it, and so many people have things to say, and so many people have songs. So I guess my challenge is keeping up with it all. Is just trying to keep aware of everything that's going on, because it's exploding.
Yeah, and I guess you're a great example of how to center yourself in that is in a community that's rich with music talent, where you have so much to observe right there in your backyard.
Oh yeah, it's mind-boggling. I mean, there's no way I could know everything that's going on around me. There's just too much. But I try to stay in touch.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, Mark, thank you so much for spending time with me today. I guess 2 questions. If someone wants to ever have a chance of attending a show at Tips Concerts, what's the best thing they could do to either get on a waiting list or sign up? Is that at tipsconcerts.com?
That's what it is.
Yeah, looks like there's a little sign up right on the homepage.
Yep.
Which I guess gets you on the VIP invitation list and maybe at an actual concert. And
it gets you on the invitation list because this is not we don't broadcast this, we don't advertise this. People who are interested sign up, and then they get invitations to what's happening.
Cool. And then I guess the same is somewhat true with Airy Studio, that airystudio.com or at Airy Studio on Facebook if they want to learn more about what you're doing and maybe ask you some questions, right?
Absolutely. Happy to talk to anybody.
Well, hey man, it's a real pleasure to finally get to chat with you. And I was just sharing this conversation with a guy named Chris Taylor, who's based in San Antonio today.
Yeah, I know.
Okay. I was telling him that my wife Sammy and I, because of a stopover we did in Austin last year when we go to the States, I said, I want to start making Austin and San Antonio bouncing between the two, a kind of a regular thing when we come here. So, hopefully I'll get to meet you in person. Maybe I'll be lucky enough to be around when a Tips concert show's going on and we can find ourselves there. That would be great.
That would be wonderful, man. I look forward to that.
Okay, and if you ever get a wild hair and want to come visit Panama, you have my number now, so you just let me know.
Okay, you got it.
And the coming of the morning light will not see them mercy bound. And some will never dream again from sleeping on the ground, just longing to belong, dying to be mercy bound. Oh, please don't stop your dreaming. Someday we'll all be mercy bound.
Hey, thanks for listening. Question for you. Are you struggling to move your music journey forward? I can help. If not personally, then by referring you to the next best available resources. Schedule a free 15-minute call with me to find out if I can indeed help you. It's easy. Just visit unstarvingmusician.com/coaching to schedule your call today. Look for links to just about everything covered in this episode in the show notes at unstarvingmusician.com/podcast. This episode was powered by the Unstarving Musician's Guide to Getting Paid Gigs, How to Get Booked and Paid What You're Worth Over and Over Again. It's available on paperback, Kindle, and ebooks just about everywhere you can find them. It's also available as a standalone podcast called the Unstarving Musician's Guide podcast. You can learn more about the book and companion podcast at unstarvingmusician.com/book. I'd love it if you picked up a copy and would love it even more if you left a review. With much gratitude, peace, love, and more cowbell.